So, hi everyone. I'm here with Mark Pearce today, who's from Wiser, and Wiser sort of in the digital transformation kind of space. And I know you work across a lot of different kind of sectors. So, Mark, thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here.
So I suppose we were just chatting a little bit before around like some of the areas where you're working. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of like digital transformation across the different sectors? And we were talking a little bit about, banks as an example versus housing associations and across that sort of continuum. But what are you seeing in terms of digital transformation, the state of it?
I think AI has had a huge impact. There's no doubt about that. I think before people looked at it as a almost like a form of magic, and I can understand why they have that view. It's because when you use ChatGPT and Gemini yourself, it comes back with amazing answers and seems to understand you intuitively. The challenge with digital transformation is people feel that magic is directly transferable to a institutional project. And just like magic, it's going to solve all the traditional problems you have in any form of digital transformation. One of the biggest is obviously change management and getting people to use things properly. So what do I see? I see AI as a new tool which has a lot of potential. I think people using that as a reason not to embrace AI quickly, because I feel you can solve your data problems as you move through a project, and AI can certainly help you do that. I think there is a lot of concern around bias, and there should be within digital transformation projects that want to use AI. But again, that's not looking at what the status of the market was prior to that, which is humans putting in data and their own unconscious bias being filtered through the system anyway. So bias is there whether you like it or not. It's how you manage it. And then I think it really comes down to prioritizing the different projects. I think the skill that today is more about the business cases, the scope, understanding where the opportunities are, and then making an initial, I guess, taking an initial step just to prove value very quickly and in the short term, which then you can build upon over time. Big, long, rambling answer there, but hopefully I covered some topics that might be of interest to you.
Yeah, so I suppose AI has been it's been a huge amount in the media. It's sort of grown exponentially. You're right. We've all been using Gemini or ChatGPT, and it's like, I seem to have so many services now. I don't know what to do with them. I got about six of them. I seem to all use at the same time. So it's sort of exploded in like the public consciousness. But do you think it's like implementing into businesses. Do you think we've almost like reached peak AI in terms of that hype cycle? Because it feels like it's sort of like tailed off, and now we're getting into almost like an implementation phase. Because it doesn't feel like this year, it doesn't feel like it's as prominent as it has been in previous years, and it's almost like, do you think there's a sense of disappointment around it amongst the people who don't know, but actually we're getting to this is now the delivery time?
I think hype cycle was a great way to look at it. I think a lot of money went into AI. Well, at least the news headlines said it was. I think some of the accounting measures, maybe not quite so much money went into the technology stack. The truth is that organizations take time to think about this. You think about some of the really big digital transformation projects, they're not overnight, they take a long time. So I'm not surprised they're not getting the immediate returns they expected from AI. Certainly the big providers like Google and OpenAI. So yeah, I think the hype cycle is exactly the right way to look at it. I believe organizations now are starting to create those business cases, build the investment cases around using AI in specific parts of their business. So you've got the traditional sort of development and back end, which is all around how do we improve the way that we develop products, with using AI to help us code and therefore increase pace, reduce cost. You've also got people thinking about how they use AI to structure a lot of the unstructured data in the background so they can get better insights. That's all good. And then certainly on the sort of more customer facing area, it's all about customer experience, and AI is being used to tailor traditional customer workflows to an individual, which obviously, if you take that forward would mean that people feel more looked after, but at the same time, you haven't got the huge cost of employing a person to look after a single person. You can effectively build a model that looks after thousands, tens of thousands individuals in a customized way. So I believe that's now starting to be seen. I also feel people are getting smarter around the costs of these exercises. If you just look at the costs of using Gemini, for instance, and they price it on a token basis, and you use thousands and thousands of these tokens at a time to do specific exercises. The cost of those for the latest model just went up by 5 times the other day.
Okay.
So there is now a conscious, probably it's not common actually, but I think it's people are starting to realize, if I'm going to build on in the past you'd build on a single tech stack. Now you're thinking about building on, say, Gemini or building on ChatGPT. You've now got to consider some of those big cost increases, because they update the models every year and they sunset the old model. So assuming your prompts work on the new model, okay, fine, but you're still going to be paying a higher price. So there's this tension is going to arrive in the market between open source models and closed source models. And I thought that was going to be quite a few years away, but I think that's probably going to be brought forward a little bit now.
I mean, that's certainly one of the things I've noticed is you write prompts. So if I write prompts to automate things in the background, and then the model changes, and then your prompts don't give you the same kind of output. I mean, and it's sort of like you've spent a lot of time. Maybe it's a construct of how I've written my prompts, but we sort of critique that. But it's you don't get, if you do that, then the whole thing can fall over, right? So I suppose, and I just wonder if that's sort of going to drive us towards more sort of like open source, as you said, particularly from a costing point of view. I mean, do we actually need the extra complexity or not for all jobs as well?
I think it's a really good point. I think a lot of the models are built for robotics, or, they're all moving to what artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence, whatever that is. And if they're developing these models with that goal in mind, when you're dealing with a specific, on the front end, from a customer service perspective, if you're dealing with a specific set of customers that ask very similar questions over time, you don't need super intelligence to answer those. You need like a model that has been proven to work, and that doesn't need to be the latest model. So I can see in that instance why open source will come into its own, because people will say, I don't need the latest model. I don't need this to be upgraded. And I can see people locking that down more, constraining the potential increase in costs to make sure that it's still cost efficient and they get the return on investment they required.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting about some of the open source models is just like efficiency. Like, we don't really talk a lot about model efficiency because it's all been sort of hidden in the cloud. But some of that is really when DeepSeek came out. I suppose like these newer models that kind of came in seem to be way more efficient. I mean, I've been running some. You just run some locally on your computer now. You can do that, whereas before you couldn't, right? So it's almost like there's an efficiency layer that isn't really talked about that seems to be coming in that makes it much more cost effective to sort of run these things locally.
I agree with that to a certain extent, but if you're doing things on an institutional level at scale, you've got to then source all the GPUs and do all the processing. That's the magic of the closed source models. You don't have to worry about that. You just pay a fixed price and they deliver the service. So I agree with, at a high level, with what you're saying, but there's a balance and there's a lot of detail underneath it. So you need to think about that really carefully. Also, which will be a common understanding amongst your client base, is when you go into the cloud services, they're really quite hard to navigate. You've got to know what you're doing. So you could almost have a Microsoft Azure expert, but if you're also accessing models through Amazon Marketplace and also models through Google Cloud, your Azure person is not going to be anywhere near as familiar with those platforms as they are with Azure. And with Azure, they've got all these things that you can use to try and minimize your bill. I don't know whether you've actually ever tried to set these things up. I have. And it's totally confusing. And then when you're being asked to look at 3 different cloud platforms, it's really hard to try and minimize your costs, because you end up ticking things, forgetting about it, then looking at your bill, wondering, why is that going up? And you go, oh, yeah, we tick that. well, why aren't we using this over here? Oh, well, they have these optimization tools, but for some reason it didn't pick that up. So it's a real minefield. And I feel where organizations always believe they can do it better themselves, I think this is where specialists come in
Mm.
that do this on a daily basis. I know you think I would say that because I work for a specialist, but it's just true. This is what we do every day. So we're on top of those things.
I mean, the cost angle is kind of interesting, which is, I mean, you'd think that with the pressure of open source, that it was almost like there would be pressure, like a downward pressure around, like, you know, cost per token is cost per thousand tokens. But it sounds like, and I know there's profitability challenges of particularly some of the large providers, and so that it sounds like you're sort of seeing potential, there could be potential cost risk from that as well, in terms of like potentially increasing, which I think that's kind of interesting in terms of them trying to recover revenue, so recover costs from that point of view. I mean, just going back, I suppose, to implementation. I mean, there was a lot of sort of talk around, we're just going to throw Copilot into an organization. It's going to kind of save money and those sort of things. And people like, there are even business cases written on that. Look how much money it's kind of saved. As you say, it's sort of like moving to sort of like detailed processes. But I suppose, what's your advice in terms of where to start looking at those or finding those, because often they sort of come across as like a lot less sexy, but there's probably a lot of value there. I mean, how do organizations, or how should organizations decide where to start looking?
Yeah, it's I kind of flip around this quite a lot. I think with the challenge with a general product like Copilot is it's only going to be as good as the training that you provide as an organization to your staff members. And that training isn't going to be a once and done. You're going to have to continue to do it year on year on year. Because Copilot, powered by OpenAI and ChatGPT, is also going to improve and upgrade over time, and it'll have more capability. So some of the prompts that you write might not be as effective the next year. So you'll have to rethink them again. And you've just articulated that yourself. So whilst I feel Copilot is useful, it's only as useful to the people that have the attitude that they want to spend time and dig into it and make it work. Everyone has said for decades, Excel is dead. No one's ever going to use it. But everyone still uses it now. And that's because it's very simple, but also it has a lot of complexity underneath it. You've probably experienced real sort of power users where they get into the deep code and they write stuff. You go, wow, that's incredible. But how many people have the inclination and time to do that? They don't. So the same's going to be with Copilot, because the same's like another analogy I could make is like your inbox on Outlook. There is so much functionality that you can use on there, and you just don't do it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real difficulty for organizations rolling out Copilot, because clearly whenever you're using AI, you've always got the risk of hallucinations and you've always got the risk of bias. And if you're knocking out emails and responses to people using Copilot, and you're not teaching people constantly to be aware of bias and hallucinations, suddenly you've got a problem.
I mean, on hallucinations were talked about a lot. I mean, do you think that it feels like they're becoming less common? I mean, it feels like the industry's done quite a lot to sort of like manage some of that. Bias is probably a little bit more hidden and a lot more subtle, which is probably I'd imagine is probably like is a big issue, but you might not be aware of it unless you're really looking out for it. I mean, how have you sort of seen the sort of the landscape of those two sort of like changing?
This may be completely the wrong way to look at it, but I'm going to explain it this way anyway. I kind of think about AI like a medical prescription. You're going to have some really likely side effects, less likely side effects, and very rare side effects, but you're going to get them. So it's when people talk about, oh yeah, well, bias has been mitigated. It isn't. It won't be. It's just how you manage it. And the same is with hallucinations. Even the creators of these models sometimes don't quite understand why it came out with a certain response. And it's because they don't work in the same way that a human brain works. Probably the easiest way to say it is something triggers a different personality in it, and therefore it comes up with a slightly different response. So to say you're never going to come up with hallucinations just isn't true. So that's why you really must have a human in the loop. And the human in the loop can be as simple as someone just reads it. So if it's a an email to a client, or it's a response to a client, rather than just putting it in and sending it off, you should read it. You really should. And that's part of like almost like a quality standard. So the bias could be things like not understanding someone. And by not understanding what they've said and creating a response, which is kind of a hallucination because it hasn't understood them, and then sending that out, that's a huge risk. Whereas if someone then read it and went, well, I've just looked at Chris's file, this doesn't seem right. So it will certainly save time, but to believe that AI will fully automate entire services, I think is dangerous, really, really dangerous.
And I suppose we kind of argue how is that different from a human, right? Because we all have our own biases, or we have our own, I wouldn't say we have our own hallucinations, but we can, we'll sort of fill in the gaps if we need to, and that might be right or it might be wrong. And I suppose that part of the difference is that if you're doing it through an automated process, you're doing the same things happening not just once, but it's happening multiple times. So the risk kind of explodes. And I suppose that's, I kind of think of it in terms of often in terms of like, like employees to a certain extent. I mean, but how do we put controls in to sort of check that? I mean, you can have people sort of looking through it, and then I suppose then particularly then, how do you make sure that, say, for example, in the case of medical records, someone's looking through it, but it's right 99.95% of the time that they're used to it just being right, so you just get almost like desensitized to the one that's wrong. So you just pass it through, and so you just miss the mistake. I mean, have we got to start thinking about that?
Yeah, we certainly should. We should never stop thinking about that. But we also have to be realistic about where we are today. I think when people look at AI, there seems to be a much higher standard that it has to pass through, which, if you think about it, is a bit odd because there's already bias, even if it's unconscious in humans, and the error rate, arguably, with humans just doing the process their own way is still ridiculously high. You could argue that if there is a bit of bias or hallucination within the AI, you pick it up.
Mm.
You don't pick it up from a human because you never hear about it until there's a complaint or there's some serious detriment that happens
Mm.
months, years later. And then you have to do a big investigation to find out why did that happen. And it was, well, Chris had a bad time that year and wasn't being as diligent as he was in previous years. So it's like, right, wow, okay. So I think people use a lot of these arguments not to do something. That's wrong. And I feel it is people should be embracing this and working out methods to make it better than the current system today. So rather than turning around and saying, I'm not doing it for that reason, it is, no, I am going to embrace this. And I know we're far from perfect today, but I'm going to get a better version of our business tomorrow than it is today using AI.
Yeah. I mean, certainly if I look at some of the stuff that I do or I come across, or in the consulting world, right? I mean, some of the things you would do, and you spend time sort of laboriously, for example, creating a presentation or transcribing a piece of call or something like that, to make notes, and the ability to just be able to do that so quickly, I mean, it's transformational, really. I mean, analyzing documents as an example,
Yeah.
and I suppose it's just like what happens to that time, and then what are our jobs going to turn into, because we're going to be sort of like almost like managing these different AIs and doing yet more stuff out there. And it does kind of feel like if you don't have that capability, the capability around AI and understanding that, you're just going to be at such a disadvantage from a productivity and an efficiency point of view. It real feels like we're on the cusp of quite a big change, particularly in the services industry, at least anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I really do. I think it's massive. Everyone has just been talking about productivity and efficiency for the last few decades. But don't you feel that you've lost the human touch?
Mm.
And don't you miss that?
Yeah.
And I feel that this is where AI may turn that model on its head and say, well, look, I've created loads of efficiency for you, bank, financial services provider. Your profits are still pretty high, but you're losing the human touch people going elsewhere because actually they're employing more humans to have face-to-face conversations and build relationships, which is ultimately all about trust. So what are you going to do? And I feel like we're, rather than it all just becoming robotic and, you know, the bank's going to shrink from tens of thousands of people to, you know, a couple of thousand that sit there reaping in lots of money through all these AI implementations, I've got a funny feeling it might go, yeah, sure, you're more profitable. Yeah, sure, you are more efficient, but you're still going to have to employ loads of people because everyone wants that human to human relationship.
I mean, if you look at what's happening with social media at the moment, I mean, there's this term, isn't it? It's like AI slop, I think it's called. And I, mean,
Yeah.
I look at my feeds over the last, it is literally over the last 2 months, and like now there's all these videos out there and they're generated, and it's very hard to tell, other than the fact that they're completely wild from what you'd ever see in real life, in terms of are they real or not, right? So they're very hard to tell that, and you just wonder. I'm finding it very hard now to get real information from real humans because everything's just sort of auto-generated. And you wonder if that's a bit of a counterbalance where it's, yeah, to your point, now we're going to want to have person-to-person conversations. Now we're going to want to, have in-person conversations because if you actually meet someone, you can guarantee it's a real person, right?
Yeah.
And it's part of society. It's a real thing rather
Yeah.
than just something that's automatically generated.
I totally agree. I think I watched a program quite a long time ago, and it was about certain areas of the world where people lived well into their hundreds. And it turns out an important part of that is being amongst a community and spending time with other people, building relationships. So the idea that we move away from that and become more insular, I just don't think it's going to work. We've got an aging population. More and more of those people need to engage socially. It almost feels like that's a model that customers would turn around to banks and go, yeah, I want that more personal relationship going forward. You know what it's like if you've got a serious situation that you've just been through, and there are certain things where maybe you're embarrassed about it, maybe you don't want to admit what you've done. There is a certain sector of the community that will just chat to a chatbot and provide that information because it's anonymous. You can do it at any time in the night and it doesn't judge you in any way. But there'll also be a set of people that really want to create a connection around it to someone else to say, yeah, it's all right, don't worry about it. Other people have been through this. This is a normal human thing to happen. This is a human condition. It's something you can share and heal from.
Mm.
And I feel that AI will open those opportunities and as a result come out with much better results in the long term.
Do you think that's a competitive advantage we can look at? Because you're right, we've talked a lot about using AI to take cost out, making things more efficient, those kind of things. We haven't talked a lot around sort of like how do you then use that to then add services or add personal services? I mean, have you seen that people doing that yet? I mean, is that a competitive advantage we should be thinking about just to trying to think ahead in terms of like where this is kind of going? So launching a service to say, look, here we're going to give you personalized service with people, but in the background, you still need the AI to make it as efficient as possible so it doesn't cost a fortune.
Um, I haven't seen it within the banking community, or I haven't seen it within the sort of personalized finance industry. I know that from on the sort of, I guess, on the debt side, it's very relationship led. One area which I have seen it really start to work is within housing associations, where a lot of people have joined because they believe in the mission of the housing association. They believe in community, and yet they've gone and joined them and they're inundated with administration and bureaucracy. So they don't actually get out to meet anyone. AI then steps in. We know this because some of our products are used in that sector. And then suddenly these people are going out to market and are able to look people in the eye and have a proper conversation rather than having a piece of paper or a checklist going, what about this? What about that?
Yeah.
What about that? Not building a relationship. So I think it is going to become more important going forward because AI will be crossing the I's, dotting the T's in the background, and you'll be able to build that relationship and therefore get better information out of people. You know what? One thing that I don't understand what I do in one essence, but it frustrates me in another, is why is it that people have to share their data or get it collected by each different organization they speak to, whether that's a utility provider, a bank, an insurer, your local authority, your housing association, a retailer? It's like, here I go again. I've got to repeat myself over and over again. Wouldn't it be great, basically, if they could just say, well, I've got my own source of information. I know your AI is going to require certain pieces. I want to make sure that you're going to delete all that information once it's done its analysis. But here you go, you can get access. I don't need to repeat myself.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. That saves a lot of time, saves a lot of stress. It means it's always accurate because you know you're only looking at one thing to keep that up to date. That for me sounds like a much better idea. The challenge with it is that lots of people have built businesses around data that they've collected on individuals. Also, people don't want to be trapped. It's like the digital ID thing. So they think that there would be a potential of Big Brother around that. But if you are somehow able to navigate all of those voices, all of those interested parties, to bring them together to create that type of solution in time, I think the benefits of that would be huge and really play into that. Let's give people more time to build relationships rather than just a point in time transaction.
I mean, I think I think you're right. It's almost like this like organized kind of data flow or economy, sort of like it usually work. It can work pretty well. I suppose the challenge I suppose with humans is often like our human worlds it just always amazes me just how messy it all is. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like if we think about it and we draw it out on a on a flow chart and a piece of paper, and it's like it makes a lot of sense, and it's going to be really efficient. But then you sort of put the humans into it, and it just becomes like this sort of like I don't know how we get anything organized sometimes, but it just seems to be sort of based on who you know and when it happens and who you sort of like happen to come across and those kind of things. And I suppose it's how do you navigate that, because it almost like feels that humans on one hand are this that's the way we sort of existed in this organic kind of way versus us now trying to put systems around it. Maybe AI can help us sort of navigate some of that so we can get to it and we can understand this sort of like messy world over here and sort of systematize it, put some structure in it, so then we can then sort of create some of those processes. I don't know.
No, yeah, I think there is. You never want to get rid of the magic of being human. Some of that chaos that you speak about is just the way we are, and that's beautiful in many different ways. I think when you're trying to run businesses and trying to be efficient, that sort of whole life perspective is challenging. So if you're an organization that's providing a home or you're an organization that's providing a mortgage, all you really care about is does it meet the person's needs and are they going to pay the money? And it's kind of like that, really, if they're honest, that's the transaction, right? But really what you should be doing is think about the person in a holistic way. It's like, is this an impulsive purchase and can they afford it? If it is impulse, why are they being impulsive? It's like, should we create some deliberate friction for them here because it feels like this could be a moment in time that has come about from other aspects of their life, which are unfortunate and they're not in the right frame of mind to make this decision. A classic vulnerability type assessment, but more in depth, more holistic. And I think helping people navigate those times is really a kind of goal for the future, because then you're talking about care, you're talking about stewardship, you're genuinely thinking about the customer, not just your transaction. I've gone on a bit of rambling there, but hopefully that gives you some sort of perspective of the way I kind of think.
So if we and so I absolutely agree. I mean, so we all have this situation. I suppose what I was actually thinking was there's a balance there between maybe like how prescriptive do we want to be with customers and sort of like almost like knowing themselves better than we know ourselves. And I think some of my social media probably knows me better than I
Yeah.
know myself sometimes. Certainly in the way when it's like recommends certain stories, the next recipe comes up or whatever it is, right? So how do we navigate that? Where almost like the AI might know us better, statistically know us better, and
Mm.
it's quite predictable. That's sort of shown versus ourselves. and we've got our own biases in terms of like, confirmation bias, ignoring the reality of things. I mean, these are all things that humans do, that we all do it, right? And I suppose,
Yeah.
how do we navigate that? Because you've got something that's probably more accurate than we actually see ourselves, right? To a certain extent. But we're still the customer over here, and we've still got to be persuaded of that to a certain extent. We've got to be persuaded to take action to, let's say, on our account if we're in arrears. We've got to be persuaded to go down a certain path. And it might be a little bit painful, but over the longer term it's probably the right thing to do. And it's like that's the kind of the situation we're in to sort of like navigate. I don't know how we sort of think about that really.
Yeah, I think the modern world is really hard to navigate. And I mean, we're really going off topic here, but we might as well bring it in. So if you think about the last 50 years, all of the potentially addictive things in our life have been optimized. You think about your food, it's been optimized for sugar. You think about alcohol, that industry has been optimized in the way that it sells itself to you. Smoking, vaping, that's been optimized. Gambling, that's been optimized. Social media has been optimized. TV's been optimized. Having the latest, I don't know, the latest design in sofa, the latest technology, it's all been optimized around dopamine hits and addiction. So it's no surprise that people keep finding themselves in problem areas. With knowing that, it's how is there a way to use technology just to almost slow us down a little bit and say, look, Chris, do you really want to do this? And you're like, yeah, I do. I really need that hit. And it's like, you wouldn't put it in that language, but that's probably what's driving it. And, is there a way of it to gently, not say no, but gently sort of take you down a slightly better path so you get a slightly better outcome? I always think about it from my childhood's perspective, single parent, council estate, that kind of stuff. I always imagined something that was telling us and saying, don't make that decision. You don't have hardly any money. You've got, hardly any savings. You're poor. You can't make decisions like other people make because if it goes wrong, you can't survive it. But yet you were fed all these things through advertising and all sorts from a very young age. So anything that can start to sort of navigate you through that life in a better way, surely that has to be a goal for the whole industry and all organizations, because then you get better customers, you get more loyal customers because you're looking out for them. This is a grand goal, Chris, right? But you could start small and build towards that in like 10, 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think with things like, so I'm talking about just going back to the AI piece. I mean, the data we have, and I suppose the ability to be able to like analyze all that data, and in a way that's probably bigger than any single human can do. I mean, that's where we're sort of getting to that kind of point. Allows us to start to, I think, draw at least some of the map, at least on some of that. I think I suppose it's the responsibility of the organisations, I suppose, to make sure that we're not just optimizing that as well, just to generate more of the same, right? Because there's a bit of a social kind of imperative, I suppose, like looking at the bigger picture, as you would say, around society, rather than just my own little bit of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is every organization that exists, there's all they want to do is optimize, and they'll always go for the thing that can help the 80% of their target customer base rather than the 20%. You're always going to be fighting against that. But I feel this is why you need to take certain sectors and industries on a journey and collectively do that. And I think you can do that by conducting a lot of decent research that involves the whole community, so that you start to hear about all the nuances of delivering a good service, and you start to find out about different behaviors as well around different circumstances. When you start to do that, you get a more, I guess, watered down to a certain extent, but you get a more considered approach to bringing everyone on that journey. If you are a very powerful, very wealthy individual institution, you could drive an outcome that you want. But I'm not sure that is really how we want society to evolve. You want people to have fed into a process all the way through. So the way that AI is being used now, and the way that it could be used to help you as an individual, I think there has to be a lot of organizations involved in that discussion. If you think about like the open banking and the way that that evolved, then they create the open banking implementation entity. You had all the banks involved because they had to fund it, but you had government involved, you had fintech involved, and you had consumers involved as well. It was a really good process. I mean, it had its issues, everything does, but it involved a lot of people. And I almost feel, if things are going to be developed almost like a utility, then it's almost like you say, great, we're going to build our service around this utility, but as a sector, we need to start to understand what the impact of AI is on our sector, particularly on customer experience, and particularly on tailoring services to individuals using AI, and then finding almost like the unintended consequences, the sort of the opportunity costs that we haven't potentially considered. All those type of things start to come through, and as a result, you can then start to build towards that vision. I mean, I'm talking to you maybe in an idealistic way. I mean, a lot of people were just thinking, I just want to make more money using AI, and I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very optimistic view of the future. I mean, and I think it's this like a grand vision around trying to make society better as a result of it. Just to sort of come back on that. I mean, the next sort of, I mean, where do you think we go from here? I mean, you sort of like laid out, I suppose, where you'd like us to get to. I mean, the next couple of steps or the next couple of years, where do you think what do we got to focus on to get there?
So when you say we, that's a lot of people with a lot of different goals, ideas, strategies. So I can't answer that in a with any kind of sweeping statement. If you're an institution, I feel that your relationship with your customers is going to change fundamentally over the next 5 years. And that's because services are going to come in that can tailor automatically provide exactly what the client needs. And they'll start to think about their client in a more holistic way. And I believe institutions that don't embrace that will start to lose customers to more agile, more AI first type organizations. As individuals, like us, me, you, citizens, I think we're about to go on a journey as well. Before if we were presented with something, we'd go and do a bit of research about it. You might ask people in the street, or you might then go to, I don't know, Citizens Advice or somewhere like that, find out some information on it. When it came to social media and the internet, you were able to do the research yourself. You might have influencers on social media, but hopefully you've got that kind of slightly cynical approach where you'd think, I'm not going to believe everything this person says. I might look at several different influencers, or if I'm researching this, I'll go to several different sites to research whether this is true or not. In the age of AI, you have a single answer engine. Now, it might present some of the sources to you, but it will interpret those sources potentially in a slightly positive way. So I don't know about you, but whenever I'm presented anything with AI, with a source, I go to the source, read the source, come back to the AI and go, I think you've made that a little bit more optimistic. That's not what that research said.
Right.
You've made that. I think it's more like this. And it goes, oh yeah, sure, you're absolutely right. That's the good perspective to look at. And you think, now a lot of people, because they're going to be short on time, will just take whatever the answer engine says and go, yeah, that's gospel. So you're going to start to have individuals who are almost going to need to be taught how to use these answer engines. And you're going to have institutions that are going to have a complete rethink on what they exist to do. It's not about a single transaction anymore. It'll be more about holistic thinking about how you deliver services to people, making sure that other aspects of their life are also considered.
It does feel like there's a lot for us to think about, and it's almost like unintended consequences is one of the things that happens. So we put these things in, but then we've got to think through what the consequences are, and almost like in like that 3D space, almost like we've got to think of it a couple of layers deep as well, which we haven't necessarily got to there. In terms of like, even in terms of just like taking the answer the first comes out with, then you've got to check it, and then you've got to double check it, or you've got to cross-reference it, those kind of things. So I mean, it's certainly it's an interesting journey. Sometimes I just feel like we're not necessarily aware of how much it can change yet, change things yet. And I was listening to the radio the other day, and it's like, we're still doing a lot of the things we always did, and we probably always will, but there's fundamentally some of the things are going to change, and we'll see it sort of accelerate, I'd imagine. So
Yeah, definitely.
Mark, thanks very much for joining me. I really, really, really appreciate it. It's great to chat to some of these ideas, and I love it when we go off piste as well. So
Okay, yeah.
that's great. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Cheers, Chris.